Caleb Hunter slammed his bare fist through a wooden wall and didn't flinch. Not because he didn't feel it. Because pain had stopped meaning anything to him the moment he watched his 12-year-old daughter hit the concrete floor. 3 men stood in his garage, laughing. They thought they'd broken a mechanic. They had no idea they'd just woken up something that 15 years of quiet living had barely managed to put to sleep. The town of Silver Creek, Arizona, was about to learn what every Hell's Angel from Phoenix to Flagstaff already knew. Some men don't beg. Some men don't run. Some men become the thing you fear. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next. The first thing people noticed about Caleb Hunter was that he never seemed to be in a hurry. Not when he was sliding underneath a '94 Ford pickup with a cracked oil pan. Not when he was waiting for Mrs. Delgado to count out exact change quarters and dimes for a $60 brake job that took him 3 hours. Not even when the summer heat in Silver Creek, Arizona hit 114 degrees and the industrial fan in the back of his garage just moved the hot air around in slow, useless circles. Caleb moved like a man who had already survived everything the world was going to throw at him. Which, if you knew the truth about him, made perfect sense. But nobody in Silver Creek knew the truth about Caleb Hunter. They knew the version he'd built for them over 11 years of showing up, of being dependable, of keeping his head down and his hands busy. They knew the guy who opened Hunter Auto Repair at 7 sharp every morning, who kept a pot of black coffee going all day, who charged honest rates and never talked more than he had to. They knew the wide shoulders under the faded gray mechanic's shirt, the calloused hands, the jaw that looked like it had been carved out of something harder than most men were made of. They knew he had a daughter named Lily, who came in after school every day and sat in the corner on an old stool doing homework, or handing him tools and asking questions about engines that were way too smart for a 12-year-old. They knew his wife had died 4 years ago. Cancer. They knew he didn't talk about it. And that was all they knew. That was all Caleb wanted them to know. The garage sat at the edge of town, where old Route 9 started to thin out before it merged with the interstate. And on a slow Tuesday morning in early October, Caleb was alone under a '03 Silverado with a transmission that had given up the ghost somewhere between Silver Creek and Tucson. The radio was on low classic rock nothing. He chose just whatever came through the old transistor on the shelf, and the smell of motor oil and metal dust was so familiar to him by now that he barely registered it anymore. He was reaching for the socket wrench when he heard boots on the concrete. Heavy, slow, deliberate. Not a customer's walk. Not the shuffle of someone coming in nervous about an estimate. This was someone who walked like they expected the floor to belong to them. Caleb didn't come out from under the truck. "Be with you in a minute," he said. There was a pause. Then the sound of something being set down on his workbench. Something flat. Paper. "Take your time," a voice said. The voice was the kind that had been practiced. Smooth at the surface, something rotten underneath. A voice that was used to giving instructions and not used to hearing anything back, but yes. Caleb finished what he was doing because he always finished what he was doing and rolled out from under the truck on the creeper board. He sat up and looked at the man standing in the middle of his shop like he already owned it. Victor Kane was 45 years old and built like money. Not real money, but the kind of money that came from taking it. He was broad across the chest, running a little thick in the middle, wearing a collared shirt that was too clean for any legitimate business in Silver Creek. He had a ring on his right hand, heavy gold, and he wore it the way some men wore weapons. 2 men stood behind him near the bay door. They weren't introduced. They weren't there for conversation. Victor looked around the garage, the way a landlord looks at a property. He's already decided to redevelop. "Nice place," he said. "Small, but nice." Caleb stood up, wiped his hands on the rag hanging from his belt, looked at the piece of paper on his workbench without touching it. "What is that?" he said. "Invoice," Victor said. "Monthly protection fee, $300. Keeps things running smooth for businesses in this area. Keeps the wrong kind of attention away." He smiled. "Think of it as insurance." Caleb looked at the paper. Then he looked at Victor. His expression didn't change. "I've got insurance," he said. Victor's smile stayed put. "Not like this, you don't." The two men by the door shifted slightly. Not much. Just enough. Caleb picked up the paper. "Read it. Set it back down." "No thank you," he said. Victor blinked. It was a small thing. Almost nothing, but Caleb caught it. Because in Caleb's experience, men like Victor only blinked like that when something happened that wasn't in their script. "I'm sorry." "I said no thank you," Caleb repeated. Same tone, same volume. "I don't need protection. I'm not going to pay for it. You can take your invoice and go." Victor stared at him for a long moment. The smile had changed. It was still there, but it had gone from smooth to something else, something that was working out a calculation. "You know," Victor said, "most guys, they hear the word protection, they understand right away what that means, what it's protecting them from. You follow me?" "I follow you," Caleb said. "So you understand what happens when a business in this area decides not to participate?" "I understand what you're implying," Caleb said. "And I'm telling you clear as I can that the answer is no. Same answer, it'll be tomorrow. Same answer, it'll be the day after. You're welcome to bring the invoice back as many times as you like, but the answer won't change." He turned back to the Silverado. "Have a good day," he said. The silence in the garage stretched out. Caleb heard Victor breathe through his nose. Heard one of the men by the door mutter something low. Heard Victor's boots turn on the concrete. "Enjoy your morning," Victor said. His voice was pleasant again. That was somehow worse than if it had been angry. "We'll talk again soon." The boots walked out. Caleb waited until he heard the vehicle leave the lot. Then he stood very still for a moment, hands on the Silverado's frame, looking at nothing. He knew what he'd just done. He knew exactly what it meant. He'd been hoping he was wrong about Victor Kane. He wasn't. Lily came in at 3:15, same as always. Backpack over one shoulder, hair in a ponytail that was already half falling out. She was 12, and she had her mother's eyes dark and quick, and she moved through the garage with the easy comfort of a kid who'd grown up in it, stepping around jack stands and tool chests without looking the same way you navigate your own bedroom in the dark. "How was school?" Caleb asked. "Mr. Patterson gave us a quiz on fractions we didn't know we were having." "How'd you do?" "Probably fine." She dropped her backpack on the stool in the corner and looked at the Silverado. "You get the transmission out yet?" "Still working on it." She crouched down and peered under the truck. "You need the BE 15mm, yeah." She grabbed it from the rolling chest without being asked and slid it under the truck to him. They worked like that for a while. Companionable silence with words when they were needed. Lily had a gift for knowing when her father was in his head and when he wasn't, and she seemed to sense that today he was somewhere she couldn't see because she didn't push conversation, just handed him tools and waited. Finally, she said, "Someone came in today." Caleb glanced at her from under the truck. "What makes you think that? There's a piece of paper on your bench you didn't file. You always file paper right away." He rolled out and looked at her. She was reading the invoice with the cool, curious expression of someone who read everything she could get her hands on. "Lily. $300 a week." She set it down. Her voice was careful. "That's like a protection thing, right? Like in the movies. It's nothing you need to worry about." "Are you going to pay it?" He picked up the paper and put it in the trash. "No." She watched him. "Is that smart?" Caleb looked at his daughter for a moment. This kid who had her mother's eyes and her mother's habit of asking the right question at the wrong time. And he felt the thing he always felt when he looked at her for too long. Something that had no clean name. Love and grief and responsibility all compressed together until they were just weight. "Probably not," he said honestly. She nodded, seemed to accept that, climbed back on her stool and opened her homework. They didn't talk about it again that evening. Victor came back on Thursday. This time, he had 4 men with him. They filed into the mid-afternoon, spreading out the way. People spread out when they want to take up space, when they want a room to feel occupied and not by you. 2 of them drifted toward the tool racks. One of them stood in front of the bay door. Victor himself stopped in the center, same position as before, like he'd measured it. Caleb was at the bench. He set down what he was working on and turned around and just looked at them. 4 men. Victor in the middle. All of them watching him with varying degrees of what they thought was menace. Caleb had been in rooms with men who were genuinely dangerous. Men who didn't telegraph it. It didn't perform. It didn't need an audience for it. He knew the difference between a man who was capable of violence and a man who was borrowing someone else's violence and wearing it like a costume. Victor was the second kind. That didn't mean he wasn't dangerous. Borrowed violence still broke things, but it helped to know what you were looking at. "I thought about what you said," Victor started. "I doubt that," Caleb said. Victor paused. "Excuse me. I said I doubt you thought about what I said, because if you had, you wouldn't be back here." Caleb crossed his arms. "So let's skip the part where you pretend this is still a conversation and tell me what you actually came here to do." Something shifted in Victor's face. The practiced pleasantness cracked just at the edges. "I came here," Victor said slowly, "to give you one more chance to make a smart decision. I told you my decision. You told me no, that's not a decision, that's just noise." Victor stepped forward. "In this town, everybody pays. You understand me, everybody. I don't have exceptions, I don't have special cases. It's either participation or consequences. You pick." Caleb looked at him for a long moment. Then he uncrossed his arms and turned back to the bench. "I've got a car to finish," he said. "Close the door on your way out." The silence was different this time. Heavier. Victor stood there long enough that Caleb could feel the calculation happening behind him. The weighing of options, the assessment of whether to escalate right now or save it. Victor decided to save it. "Last chance," he said. Caleb didn't turn around. Victor left. His men followed. The last one out slapped the frame of the bay door on his way past hard enough to make it ring like a warning. Caleb waited until the sound of their vehicles faded. Then he walked to the back of the garage to the shelf where he kept the coffee maker and a few personal things, and he stood there with his hands braced on the shelf, head down, looking at nothing. He was very deliberately not thinking about what he used to know how to do. That was the deal he'd made with himself 11 years ago. Possibly the hardest deal of his life, and it had been up against some stiff competition. I was not that person anymore. He was a mechanic. He was a father. He was going to handle this the right way. He just needed to figure out what the right way was. He started asking quiet questions, not in an obvious way. Caleb hadn't survived the years he'd survived by being obvious about anything. He mentioned Victor's name in casual conversation with the right people. He listened when the woman who ran the dry cleaner down the block, Maria Espinoza, mentioned that her monthly expenses had gone up unexpectedly and wouldn't elaborate. He noticed that Pete Daniels, who owned the hardware store on 3rd, had a look in his eyes lately, like a man who was doing arithmetic about whether it was worth it to keep showing up. Within a week, Caleb had a rough picture. Victor Kane had been operating in Silver Creek for about 3 years. He'd started small, 2 or 3 businesses on the east end of town near the highway, and expanded methodically. By the current count, Caleb estimated 12, maybe 15 businesses, paying him somewhere between $200 and $500 a week. The ones who'd pushed back early had found reasons to stop pushing back. A break-in. A delivery that never arrived. One restaurant that had a fire in its kitchen that the insurance company called accidental and that everyone in town called something else. Nobody had gone to the police. Caleb understood that too. He understood the math of fear. When you're a small business owner and someone tells you that they can make your life complicated in ways that are very hard to prove and very expensive to fight, and the alternative is a monthly payment that's uncomfortable but survivable, most people do the math and choose survival. Caleb didn't blame them. He just couldn't join them. He couldn't explain the full reason even to himself. Part of it was practical. $300 a week was money he needed. Part of it was principle. He had spent years building something clean, something that didn't have anything owed to anyone, and he wasn't going to hand that over to a man like Victor Kane. But mostly, it was this. He had a daughter who watched him every day, and he needed her to see a man who didn't fold. The night before, everything fell apart. Caleb and Lily were in the garage after dinner, working on the Chevelle. The Chevelle was their project, a 1969 SS that Caleb had bought in pieces from an estate sale 4 years ago, right after Sarah died. He'd started it as something to do with his hands when the grief was bad, and then Lily had gotten interested, and now it had become something else. Something between them. Something Sarah would have liked. Lily was on a rolling stool, working on the interior door panel, with patient, careful hands. Caleb was under the hood going over the carburetor for the 4th time, not because it needed it, but because the routine of it settled something in him. "Dad," Lily said. "Yeah. Those men are going to come back, aren't they?" It wasn't really a question. Lily didn't ask questions she already knew the answer to. "Probably," Caleb said. "And when they do," he kept his hands moving on the carburetor, "I'll handle it." "How? Haven't figured that out yet." She was quiet for a moment. He could hear her working. Small, careful sounds. "I heard you on the phone last night," she said. "I wasn't eavesdropping. I couldn't sleep, and I heard you in the kitchen. You were talking to someone and you said it was a long time ago, and I'm not that person anymore." She paused. "Who were you talking to?" Caleb stopped. He set down the wrench. He came around the side of the Chevelle and looked at his daughter. She was looking back at him steady and serious in the way she'd been since she was about 6 years old, like she'd been issued extra gravity at birth. "Old friend," he said. "Someone I used to know." "From before you moved here?" "Yeah." "Before Silver Creek?" "Yeah." She held his gaze for another second. Then she went back to the door panel. "Okay," she said. Caleb watched her work. The overhead light threw warm shadows across the garage, and for a moment it was so quiet and so right. This small space that smelled like oil and old metal and home, that it felt almost like a wall between them and the rest of everything. "Your mother used to say," he started, and Lily went still in the way she always went still when he talked about Sarah, "that the only thing harder than changing who you are is convincing other people that you did." Lily didn't say anything. "I was a different person before Silver Creek," Caleb said. "I'm not going to pretend I wasn't. I did things I wouldn't do now. I was part of things I wouldn't be part of now." He picked up the wrench again. "I left all of that behind because of you. Because of your mom. Because I wanted to be the kind of man who deserved you." "You do deserve me," Lily said quietly. "That's not even a question." He almost said something. Instead, he cleared his throat and went back under the hood. "Let's get this carburetor right," he said. They worked until 10 o'clock. The next morning was when Victor Kane sent 3 men to finish the conversation. Caleb was under the Silverado again. He'd taken on the Chevelle parts delivery the previous day, and the Silverado's owner needed the truck back by the end of the week when he heard Lily's stool scrape on the concrete. She was there, which she shouldn't have been. It was a Thursday, not a weekend, but she'd told him her first 2 periods were a teacher workday, and she didn't need to be there until 10. So she was in the corner with a book, quiet as always. He heard the van first, then feet on concrete, multiple sets, quick. Then Lily said, "Dad," and then the sound of metal hitting the floor. He rolled out from under the truck. 3 men. He'd seen 2 of them before, part of Victor's regular crew. The third was new, larger, with a flat face, and the eyes of someone who'd done this kind of work long enough that it had stopped registering on him as anything notable. They'd already been here 30 seconds, and they'd been busy. One of his rolling tool chests was on its side. A rack of sockets he'd organized by size was scattered across the concrete like spilled change. The new man, the large one with the flat face, was holding a 2-pound ball-peen hammer in one hand, casually the way you might hold a cup of coffee. "Victor sends his regards," one of them said. Caleb was already moving. Not toward them, toward Lily. He put himself between his daughter and the 3 men, and he stopped moving, and he said very quietly, "Get out of my shop." The one with the hammer smiled. "We're just delivering a message." "You've delivered it," Caleb said. "Now get out." The one who'd been doing the talking medium-height wire-thin with a tattoo climbing the side of his neck walked along the workbench and swept the tools off it with one arm. Cleanly, methodically. They hit the concrete in a spray of metal. Lily made a small sound. "Here's how this works," the talker said. "Victor's a patient man. He's given you time. He's given you chances. But patience has a limit." He looked around the garage. "Nice little place you've built here. Shame if something happened to it." "Stop talking," Caleb said. "Or what?" The large one, the one with the hammer, stepped past Caleb toward the Chevelle. He raised the hammer. And Caleb said very clearly with absolute zero in his voice, "Don't." The hammer came down anyway. The hood ornament shattered. And Lily, because she was 12 and brave in a way that broke Caleb's heart. Lily came off her stool. She stepped forward. She said, "Stop, that's ours." And the talker put his hand on her shoulder and shoved her. Not hard. Not viciously. Just the casual, dismissive shove of someone removing an inconvenience from their path. Lily went down on the concrete, hard on her knee. Her hand shot out and hit the leg of the workbench and the small wooden box on the bottom shelf. The one with Sarah's things in it. The things they'd kept, the photograph and the earring and the birthday card. It fell off the shelf and the latch broke and things spilled across the floor. Lily looked at those things on the concrete, and then she looked up at her father. The look on her face wasn't fear. Not exactly. It was something worse. It was the face of a child who was watching to see what her father would do. And Caleb felt something happen in his chest. It wasn't anger. Anger was too clean a word for it. It was the kind of thing that happens in the deepest and oldest part of a person. When the world crosses a line they've been standing at the edge of for a very long time. He moved Lily gently behind him. He took her hands and pressed them, and he said quietly, "Just for her, it's okay. Go to this back office and lock the door." "Dad, please." She looked at him. Something in his face made her go. He waited until he heard the office door close. Then he turned back to the three men. He was standing very still. His hands were at his sides. He wasn't in a fighting stance. There was no display, no theater. He was just standing the way he'd learned to stand in another life, in rooms that made this garage look like a school cafeteria, with men who made these three look like the problem children they were. The talker read something in Caleb's stillness and didn't like what he read. "Look, man, take the hammer," Caleb said, "and put it on the floor. Then all three of you are going to walk out that door, get in your vehicle, and drive to wherever Victor Kane is sitting right now, and you're going to tell him that the conversation he and I need to have is done going through other people." The talker stared at him. The large one with the hammer looked between Caleb and his friend. "You serious right now?" the talker said. "There's three of us." Caleb looked at him with eyes that had been in much darker places than this garage on a quiet Thursday morning, and he said, "I know." Something happened in the room. A shift. Like pressure changing before a storm. The large man with the hammer set it on the floor. He didn't do it because Caleb told him to. He did it because whatever he saw in Caleb's face told him that the hammer was not going to be as useful as he'd thought when he walked in here. The talker's jaw worked for a moment. Then he nodded once tight and turned toward the bay door. "Victor's going to hear about this," he said. "That's the point," Caleb said. They filed out. The van started. It left. Caleb stood in his demolished shop for a moment, tools on the floor chest, overturned Chevelle's hood ornament in pieces. Sarah's things scattered on concrete, and he breathed. He breathed slowly and carefully, the way a man breathes when he is very deliberately choosing not to follow three people out the door. Then he walked to the back office. Lily was sitting on the floor with the wooden box in her lap, everything carefully replaced inside it, the broken latch held shut with her hand. She looked up at him. "You didn't hit them," she said. "No." "But you could have." He sat on the floor next to her. "Yeah." She looked at the box in her hands. "The earring is okay. The photo's okay." "Good." Silence. Caleb put his arm around her, and she leaned into him the way she'd been leaning into him since she was small enough to carry. "Who are you?" she asked. Not accusing, genuinely asking, like a puzzle she was working. "I'm your dad," he said. Yeah, she said. But who else? He didn't answer her, not yet. But in the silence of that back office with his daughter in his arm, and the ruins of his garage on the other side of the door, Caleb Hunter made a decision. He'd spent 15 years learning to be still. He'd spent 15 years choosing quiet over force, choosing patience over power, choosing the soft answer over the one that ended conversations permanently. And he was proud of that. He genuinely was. But there was a line. There had always been a line. And Victor Kane, with his borrowed menace and his ring, and his 3 men who thought they could walk into a man's life and put his daughter on the ground, Victor Kane had just walked across it. Caleb kissed the top of Lily's head. "Stay here a little longer," he said. "I've got some calls to make." He stood up. He walked back into the garage. He stood in the middle of the wreckage, and he looked at what they'd done to the place he'd built, the place his daughter had grown up. The place Sarah used to bring dinner on late nights when the bills were tight, and they were making it work together anyway. He looked at all of it. And then he picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't dialed in 11 years. It rang twice. "I heard you retired," the voice on the other end said. "I did," Caleb said. Past tense. "I need some information," Caleb said. "About a man named Victor Kane." A pause. "You know who you sound like right now?" Caleb didn't answer. "You sound like Ghost Rider," the voice said. Caleb looked around the garage. The scattered tools, the broken Chevelle, Sarah's earring safe in a wooden box in his daughter's careful hands. "Just get me what I need," he said. And the man nobody had feared in 15 years began quietly and without theater to remember exactly who he used to be. End of part 1. The call lasted 4 minutes. Caleb didn't say much. He never had. Back in the old days, the men who talked the most were usually the ones who'd done the least, and that observation had held up over 15 years of civilian life without a single exception. The voice on the other end. A man named Dex, who ran a machine shop outside Flagstaff, and whose real occupation would have made the Silver Creek Chamber of Commerce considerably uncomfortable, listened without interrupting. When Caleb finished, Dex was quiet for a moment. "Victor Kane," Dex said, "runs a protection circuit out of Maricopa County. Started in Tempe, moved operations west about 4 years ago. He's not connected to any major organization, he's independent. Freelance muscle with delusions of empire. Who backs him? Nobody serious. He's got a lawyer in Phoenix who keeps things clean on paper, and he's got about 15 guys on his payroll. Rotating crew, mostly guys who couldn't make it in anything bigger." A pause. "He's also got a county deputy on his side. Guy named Briggs. Works the Silver Creek district." Caleb absorbed that. Briggs. "So if you were thinking about walking into the sheriff's station—" "I wasn't," Caleb said. Another pause. Longer this time. "Caleb," Dex said, "you sure you want to go back down this road?" "I'm not going back down any road," Caleb said. "I just need to know who I'm dealing with." "You're dealing with a man who's done this a dozen times in a dozen towns and never faced anything that could stop him." A beat. "Until now, I guess." Caleb thanked him and ended the call. He stood in the garage for another moment, the phone in his hand, looking at the floor where Lily had gone down. There was a small scuff mark on the concrete where her knee had hit. He looked at that mark for a long time. Then he started cleaning up, not because it was the right time to clean up. Not because the mess could wait or couldn't wait. He cleaned up because he needed something to do with his hands while his mind worked, and cleaning up his own garage was about the most honest thing he could do right now. He righted the tool chest. He got down on his hands and knees and gathered sockets one by one and sorted them back into the right slots. He picked up the pieces of the Chevelle's hood ornament and held them for a moment. Clean break, probably repairable. If he found the right epoxy, probably not worth the effort, and then set them on the workbench because throwing them away felt like admitting something. Lily came out of the back office around the time he was finishing. She didn't ask any questions. She picked up a broom and started sweeping. They worked like that for half an hour in the kind of silence that is its own kind of conversation. Finally, she said, "Mrs. Espinoza called while you were on the phone. She said to tell you she was sorry." Caleb looked up. "She saw—" I think people in the strip heard it. Lily kept sweeping. She sounded scared. He nodded slowly. Maria Espinoza had been paying Victor Kane for almost 2 years. He knew that now. She ran a dry cleaner 3 doors down, and she had 2 kids in the local middle school, and she was the kind of woman who put her head down and did what she had to do to keep the lights on. She had nothing to apologize for. I'll talk to her tomorrow, he said. Lily stopped sweeping. She leaned on the broom and looked at him directly in the way she'd been doing since she was about 7. This habit of just stopping and looking at him like she could read the small print. Dad, what are you going to do? He kept working. The right thing, he said. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got right now. She went back to sweeping, but he could feel her thinking that particular weight his daughter's thoughts had in a room, the way they pressed against the air. Those men, she said. When you told them to put the hammer down. She paused. They did it. Caleb said nothing. People don't just do that, Lily said. Not for a mechanic. He picked up a wrench off the floor and hung it in its spot on the pegboard. Get your homework done, he said. I'll make dinner in an hour. She looked at him for another second. Then she went to her stool and opened her backpack. The subject was dropped. But it wasn't closed. Not even close. That night, after Lily was asleep, Caleb sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and thought about Mason Reed. Mason was 58 years old and ran a small trucking outfit in Kingman, an hour northwest of Silver Creek. They hadn't spoken in close to 5 years, not since a brief crossing of paths at a funeral for a mutual acquaintance, a funeral that had been attended by the kind of people who didn't put their real names in the guest book. Mason had looked at Caleb across the room with the particular expression of a man who is both relieved and vaguely grieved to see someone, and they'd shaken hands and said the things people say at funerals, and that had been the extent of it. Caleb hadn't called Mason yet. He wasn't sure he should, because Mason Reed was one of maybe 7 people alive who knew exactly who Caleb Hunter used to be. Not the outline of it, not the vague suggestion of a dangerous past, the specific detailed truth. The chapter and verse of it. Mason had been there for some of it. He'd watched Caleb work in the years when the name ghostwriter meant something in rooms that didn't exist officially, and he knew precisely what that name had meant. Calling Mason meant pulling someone back into the orbit of a life Caleb had spent a decade and a half climbing out of. But not calling Mason meant doing this alone, and Caleb was beginning to understand that doing this alone might not be the smartest play. He called Mason at 11:15. Mason picked up on the second ring, which meant he'd been awake, which meant he'd either heard something or his instincts were still as sharp as they'd ever been. Been waiting for you to call, Mason said. Caleb paused. How did you? Dex talked to me 2 hours ago. Told me you were asking about a man named Kane. Mason's voice was low and measured the voice of a man who'd smoked too much and regretted too little. I know about Kane. I know the whole setup, and I know his deputy. Briggs. Briggs used to work in Kingman. I know his history. He's not a true believer, he's just bought, which is actually worse because he's got no loyalty to anyone if the money stops. Mason paused. Caleb, what's your play here? I don't have one yet. Don't lie to me. You've had a play the minute they touched your daughter. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Outside the kitchen window, the desert was absolutely still, the way the desert got at night when the heat finally backed off and everything went flat and dark. I'm not going back to who I was, Caleb said. I know. I mean it, Mason. I know you mean it, Mason said. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking what you're going to do about a man who doesn't know what he kicked when he kicked you. Because there's a version of this that ends with you in prison, and there's a version of this that ends with Victor Kane never bothering anyone in Silver Creek again, and those 2 versions require different approaches. I'm aware. The second version, Mason said, requires patience, which you've always had, and evidence, which you don't have yet. And it requires knowing that Kane is going to escalate before you can build what you need. He's going to come back harder, because that's what men like him do when someone doesn't respond to the first push. He's going to test how serious you are. I know. Are you ready for that test? Caleb thought about Lily on the concrete floor, her knee on the cement, her hand going out. Sarah's box hitting the floor. "Yeah," he said. "I'm ready." Mason was quiet for 3 full seconds. "All right, I'm going to make some calls of my own. And Caleb, you still have friends, more than you think. A lot of people remember who you were. A lot of them would show up if you asked." "I'm not asking. Didn't figure you would." A pause that had something warm in it, something old. "Watch your back. Always." He ended the call. The next morning, he opened the garage at 7 as usual and worked through the day as usual, and nothing happened. Not that day, and not the day after. Victor Kane went quiet for a week, and in Caleb's experience, silence from a man like that was never a good sign. It meant preparation. It meant escalation being loaded and aimed. He kept working. He kept Lily in the garage. Les found reasons for her to go to friends' houses after school instead, which she accepted with visible suspicion, but without argument, because she was 12 and not 16, and Caleb still had some runway left before she stopped taking his suggestions. On the 6th day of silence, he drove by Maria Espinosa's dry cleaner and parked out front. Maria met him at the door. She was a small woman with strong hands and an expression that had learned to be careful. She looked up and down the street before she let him in, and that single look told Caleb everything he needed to know about how Victor Kane had been operating in this town. "Mr. Hunter," she said, "you shouldn't be here." "I'm just stopping by," he said. "How are you, Maria?" She turned and walked to the back of the shop, and he followed. She turned to face him between racks of plastic-wrapped garments, her arms folded, her voice low. "My cousin paid them for 2 years in Tempe," she said without preamble. "Before he moved away. He told me when we first moved here that Kane was in Silver Creek, told me to just pay it. Said it was easier." She looked at Caleb steadily. "I've been paying for 23 months. "I know," Caleb said. "You know. I asked around." She studied him. "Why?" "Because I want to understand what we're dealing with." She shook her head slowly. "We're not dealing with anything, Mr. Hunter. You and me. This is not a we situation. This is a situation where a man like Victor Kane has a deputy in his pocket and a lawyer on retainer, and no reason to stop doing what he's doing, and people like me and Pete Daniels and the rest of us just—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "We pay. Because we don't have another option." "What if you did?" Caleb said. She stared at him. "What if there was a way," he said, "to make Kane unable to operate? Not through violence, through the thing that actually threatens men like him. Evidence. Documentation. A paper trail that a lawyer on retainer can't make disappear." "Evidence," Maria repeated. "Payments, dates, amounts, what was said to you. Written down, documented. If enough businesses cooperated, Kane would find out," she said. "And before any lawyer could file anything, he would make an example of someone." She looked at him hard. "You understand what I'm saying? These aren't abstract consequences. He burns things. He hurts people." "I know," Caleb said. "Do you—" She leaned forward slightly. "Because you look like a man who is not sufficiently scared of Victor Kane. And in my experience, men who aren't sufficiently scared make decisions that get other people hurt." Caleb held her gaze. "I'm not scared of Victor Kane," he said. "You're right about that. But I'm not reckless either. And I'm not asking you to do anything yet. I'm just asking you to think about whether you want this to keep going." She was quiet for a moment. "My kids," she said. "My kids go to Silver Creek Middle, both of them." "I know. If anything happened to them—" "I wouldn't let it get to that," he said. "You can't promise that." "No," he said. "I can't, and I won't pretend I can." He looked at her steadily. "But I can tell you that I'm not going to walk away from this. And I'm not going to do anything stupid. I'm going to build something solid enough that when it lands on Victor Kane, it stays there." She looked at him for a long time. The shop hummed around them with the sound of the pressing machines on timers in the back. 23 months, she finally said. "I have records, every payment. I wrote it all down because I thought someday—" She trailed off. "I didn't know what I thought. I just wrote it down." "That's exactly what I need," Caleb said. When he walked out of the dry cleaner, he had the beginnings of something in his hands. Not enough yet. But the thread was there. He was 2 blocks from the garage when the pickup truck pulled up alongside him, rolling slow, and the window came down. Deputy Briggs was a heavy-set man in his mid-50s, with a face that had settled into permanent mild disappointment. He drove with his wrist over the wheel, and he looked at Caleb, the way a man looks at something he's been asked to deal with and doesn't particularly enjoy dealing with. "Mr. Hunter," Briggs said. Caleb stopped walking. He turned and looked at the truck. "Deputy." "Just doing my rounds." Briggs glanced at the dry cleaner down the street. "Visiting Mrs. Espinoza. Stopped in to say hello," Caleb said. "Nice woman," Briggs said. "Works hard." A pause. "This is a tight-knit community, Mr. Hunter. People look out for each other. They also mind their own business, which keeps things running smooth. You understand?" "I understand what you're saying," Caleb said. "Is there something I can help you with, Deputy?" Briggs looked at him for a moment, recalibrating. Caleb had given him nothing to push against. No anger, no nervousness, no reaction. Just a man standing on a public sidewalk, being perfectly, immovably polite. "Just saying hello," Briggs said. "Good day then," Caleb said. He started walking. Briggs watched him go. Caleb could feel the man's eyes on his back for half a block, but he didn't turn around, and he kept his pace exactly the same. Steady, unhurried, because the thing he'd learned a long time ago was that the way you walked away from a conversation told the other person exactly as much as anything you'd said. He got back to the garage and called Mason. "Briggs just made contact," he said. "Casual. He was watching me come out of Espinoza's place." "They've got eyes on you," Mason said. "Kane's worried." "Worried enough to back off." "No," Mason said flatly. "Worried enough to act faster. You need to move, Caleb. What do you have?" "Espinoza has records. 23 months of payments." "That's good. Who else?" "Pete Daniels at the hardware store. Maybe. He's scared." "Talk to him today," Mason said. "Not tomorrow. Today. Because if Kane is already watching you visit Espinoza, he's going to start putting pressure on the same people to make sure they don't talk to you. You've got maybe 48 hours before he closes the door." Caleb checked the time. 2 in the afternoon. "I'll go now," he said. "And Caleb," Mason's voice dropped. "Be ready for him to change tactics. He's not going to send 3 guys this time. He's going to think about what those 3 guys came back and told him, and he's going to ask himself a question." "What question?" "What kind of man makes 3 guys walk out of a shop without throwing a punch?" A pause. "He's going to start asking around about you. He might not find the right answer right away, but he's going to be looking." The call ended. Caleb went to see Pete Daniels. Pete was a 62-year-old man who had owned the hardware store for 30 years and who had the look of someone who had made peace with a war they felt they couldn't win. He met Caleb in the back of the store among the bins of screws and nails, and he listened without saying much, and when Caleb finished, Pete was quiet for a long time. "I've got a family," Pete said finally. "I know. My daughter's in college. My wife's got her sister living with us. She's not well." He looked at the bin of nails in front of him. "I can't afford to be a hero, Caleb." "I'm not asking you to be a hero," Caleb said. "I'm asking you to write down what happened to you. Dates and amounts. You keep that paper somewhere safe. You don't do anything with it until the time is right, and I tell you when the time is right." Pete looked at him. "And if the time is never right, then you've lost nothing," Caleb said, "except the 10 minutes it takes to write it down." Pete studied him. There was something happening in the older man's face, a shift of some kind, a decision being made about what to do with a situation he'd been carrying alone for a long time. "How long have you been paying?" Caleb asked. 16 months, Pete said quietly. "And I hate myself every time." "Don't," Caleb said. "You were protecting your family. There's nothing to hate yourself for." Pete was silent for another moment. Then he nodded once, short and tight, the nod of a man committing to something he's afraid of. "I'll write it down," he said. Caleb thanked him and left. Walking back to the garage, he did the math. Espinoza. Daniels. If he could get 2 or 3 more businesses to document their payments, If he could get Mason to work his contacts and find out whether anyone had reported Kane previously, whether there were records somewhere that hadn't gone anywhere because Briggs had been in the way, if he could compile everything into a package clean enough to go over Briggs's head, to the county level, to the state if necessary, it was possible. It was slow and it was careful, and it required Victor Kane to hold off long enough for Caleb to build it. He made it back to the garage at 4:15. Lily was already there. He'd given up on keeping her away. She'd simply started coming earlier to preempt his objections, and she was at the Chevelle carefully removing the broken hood ornament with a flathead screwdriver, working around the damage with the focused patience of someone who was determined to fix what had been broken. He stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment. She didn't look up. "I found an original part online. 1969 SS hood emblem. $42 shipped. We don't need—" "I already ordered it," she said. "I used my birthday money." He walked into the garage. He stood next to her and looked at the hood. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know." She kept working. "But it's our car, and I don't want it to stay broken." He put his hand on her shoulder, briefly. Just a touch, brief and warm, and she leaned into it for a second without stopping what she was doing. That was when he heard the vehicle in the parking lot. Not one vehicle, several. He heard the doors. He heard the number of feet. Something in his body registered it before his mind did some very old, very quiet alarm that he had spent 15 years trying to unlearn, but hadn't not all the way, because some things don't unlearn. He stepped to the bay door and looked out. Victor Kane was in the parking lot. Behind him, Caleb counted. He stopped at 9 and kept counting. 13 men total, maybe 14. Spread out across the lot in the gray, early evening light, casual, but positioned the way people position themselves when they've been told where to stand. Victor was smiling. It was the first time Caleb had seen him smile like that. Not the practiced boardroom smile, not the careful pleasantness. This was something rawer. This was a man who had made a decision and felt good about it. "Told you we'd talk again," Victor called across the lot. Caleb was aware of Lily moving behind him, coming to see what was happening. "Go to the back office," he said quietly. "Dad." "Lily." His voice was calm and absolute. "Back office. Lock the door. Call Mason Reed the numbers in my phone under Mason. Tell him what you see, then stay on the line with him." A beat of silence. He heard her moving. He heard the office door close. He turned back to Victor and the 13 men standing in his parking lot at 5:47 in the afternoon on a Tuesday in October. Victor spread his hands. "This is your last conversation, Mr. Hunter. You've been going around my town talking to my people. That's a problem. And problems need to be corrected." He tilted his head. "So this is how it goes tonight. You write me a check, right now, for everything you owe going back to the first day I walked in here. And then we figure out a new rate going forward, because clearly 300 was too comfortable for you." Caleb looked at him. Then he looked at the 13 men. He had done rougher math than this. "Here's what's going to happen," Caleb said, and his voice carried across the parking lot, the way it always had, without effort, without aggression, landing clean and clear. "You're going to leave. Tonight, you're going to get in your vehicles, and you're going to drive back to wherever you run your operation, and you're going to think very carefully about what you do next, because what you do next determines how the rest of this goes." Victor laughed, a genuine laugh. "Man, I've got 13 guys and you're standing there alone telling me to think carefully." He shook his head. "Who the hell do you think you are?" From somewhere behind Victor, from the back of the gathered men, from a man who had been standing quiet at the edge of the group, with his hands in his jacket pockets, came a voice, low, not directed at anyone in particular, just said almost to itself, "Ghost Rider." Victor turned. The man who'd spoken was one of the older hands in the crew, a guy named Torres who'd done time in Tucson in his 20s and who had moved in circles larger than Victor Kane's small empire. Torres was staring at Caleb with an expression that had nothing manufactured in it. It was the pure, uncut expression of a man who has just identified something in his environment that belongs in a completely different category than he'd been briefed to expect. "What?" Victor said. Torres looked at Victor. Then he looked back at Caleb. Then without a word, he took 2 steps back. Just 2 steps. But in the silence of that parking lot, it was the loudest thing that had happened all evening. Victor stared at Torres. Then he looked at Caleb. And for the first time, something moved through Victor Kane's face that hadn't been there before. Something small and fast there and gone, like a light switched briefly on in an empty room. Caleb watched it happen. I knew what it was. It was the first touch of doubt. He said nothing. He just stood in the bay door of his garage and looked at Victor Kane and let the silence do the work that silence had always done better than words. Victor straightened. The smile came back a little more rigid this time. "Tomorrow," Victor said. "We're going to settle this tomorrow. You have until noon." He turned and walked back to his vehicle. The 13 men followed. Some of them glanced back at Caleb as they went. Torres was the last one to the van, and before he got in, he stopped and looked across the lot at Caleb for a long moment. Then he nodded. It was not a friendly nod. It was not a threatening nod. It was the nod of one man acknowledging another man's real identity, the way one professional recognizes another at a distance. Then Torres got in the van. They left. Caleb stood in the empty parking lot for a moment. The desert evening was cooling fast the way it did out here. He could hear the office door opening behind him. Lily came out and stood next to him and looked at the empty parking lot. "I called Mason," she said. "Good." "He's coming," she said. Caleb turned and looked at her. "He said he'd be here by morning," Lily said. "And he said—" She stopped, looked at Caleb. "He said to tell you the ghostwriter never had to face anything alone if he didn't want to." Caleb looked at his daughter's face. Watching him. Always watching him. Reading him the way she'd been reading him since she was old enough to understand that there were things in her father's face that didn't show up anywhere else. "Who's the ghostwriter?" she asked. He looked at the empty lot. "Nobody important," he said. "Not anymore." But they both knew it was a lie. And they both knew he knew they both knew. And in the particular silence that followed, standing in the cooling air of a Tuesday evening with the desert going dark around them, and 13 men somewhere out there deciding what came next, Caleb Hunter understood that the story he'd been telling himself for 15 years, the story about the man he used to be and the man he'd become, and the clean line between them, was about to be tested in a way that left no room for comfortable fictions. Tomorrow. Victor Kane expected an answer by noon. What he was going to get was something entirely different. Mason Reed arrived at 6:43 in the morning. Caleb heard the truck before he saw it. A heavy diesel rumble that he recognized even in sleep, which was how he knew his body had never fully stopped keeping track of certain sounds. He was already at the coffee maker when the headlights swept across the garage window, and he had 2 cups poured by the time Mason's boots hit the gravel. Mason Reed was 58 years old and built like a man who had spent 4 decades doing things that required a different kind of body than most people walked around in. He was broader than Caleb remembered, or maybe it was just the jacket, a heavy canvas thing that had seen better decades. His hair had gone fully gray since the funeral 5 years ago. His face had more lines. But his eyes were the same, the steady, unhurried eyes of a man who processed the world at his own speed and was never surprised by what he found. He came through the side door of the garage, looked around at the space for a moment, then looked at Caleb. "You look tired," Mason said. "I'm fine," Caleb said, and handed him the coffee. Mason took it and drank, and didn't argue, because he'd known Caleb Hunter long enough to understand that fine and okay and not bad were all the same word in Caleb's vocabulary, and what they all meant was still standing. "Lily asleep?" Mason asked. "For now." "When does she wake up?" 6:30 usually. She's got school." Mason nodded. He set the cup down on the workbench and looked at the Chevelle. Looked at the place where the hood ornament had been. Looked at the slight dent on the driver's side door that hadn't been there before. "Tell me everything," Mason said. "From the beginning. Don't leave anything out." So Caleb told him. He stood with his own coffee and talked in the quiet, flat way he talked when he was being precise about something, and Mason listened without interrupting, the way Mason had always listened, completely with the stillness of a man storing information rather than reacting to it. When Caleb finished, Mason was quiet for almost 30 seconds. Torres, Mason finally said. Yeah, Eddie Torres. Ran with the Desert Kings out of Tucson about 15 years ago, before your time with the chapter, but you were around long enough that your name would have come through the circuit. Mason looked at him. He recognized you. He did. And Kane doesn't know what that means yet. He will, Caleb said. Sooner or later someone's going to tell him. Sooner, Mason said, because Torres is going to tell him. Not out of loyalty to Kane. Torres doesn't have loyalty to anyone who hasn't earned it. He's going to tell him because a man like Torres does not want to be standing next to Victor Kane. When Victor Kane finds out he's been poking at Caleb Hunter without knowing who Caleb Hunter is. Caleb set his cup down. How long do we have? Before Kane knows, maybe he already knows. Maybe Torres made a phone call on the drive back last night. Mason looked at him steadily. The question isn't how long before he knows. The question is what he does with the information. Two options, Caleb said. He backs down or he escalates. Kane won't back down, Mason said. Men like Kane can't back down. They've built everything they have on the image that they don't. And the minute word gets out that Victor Kane walked away from a problem, every other problem he's been sitting on gets bigger. Mason shook his head. He's going to escalate. He's going to come tonight, and he's going to come with everything he has, because he needs to end this before his own people start asking questions about why one mechanic in Silver Creek is still standing. Tonight, Caleb said. He gave you a noon deadline. He doesn't expect you to meet it. The deadline is theater. The real move is later when it's dark, when he can control how the story gets told afterward. Caleb stood very still for a moment. He was running numbers in his head, not violence numbers, not the old math of bodies and positions and outcomes, but the other numbers. The ones that actually mattered now. I've got Espinosa's records, he said. 23 months. Daniels is writing his down. There are at least a dozen other businesses. I need more of them to document before tonight. Mason looked at him. You're still going the legal route. I was never going any other route. Caleb, if Kane comes tonight with the kind of numbers he brought to your parking lot, then I deal with tonight when it comes, Caleb said. But I'm not building a case with violence. I build it with evidence. I take it over Briggs's head to the county attorney's office, and I put Victor Kane somewhere he can't operate from. He looked at Mason. That's the play. Mason was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. All right. What do you need from me? I need you to talk to businesses on the south end of the strip. Ramos at the auto parts place and Gwyn at the restaurant. They've both been paying. I've seen the fear in their faces. And while I do that, I'm going to find out everything I can about the county attorney's office and how far Kane's reach actually goes. Briggs is bought, but Briggs is a deputy. If I can find out whether the corruption stops with him or goes higher. I know someone, Mason said. Assistant county attorney named Deborah Wills. She's been in that office 12 years. She's clean. I'd stake my life on it. You sure? I vouched for her brother's parole hearing 6 years ago, Mason said. I know her. Can you get her on the phone today? I can try. Mason picked up his coffee again. You know what you're doing, right? You're building a case under a deadline. I know. And if Kane moves before the case is ready, then I handle it, Caleb said. The way he said it, quiet, final, with nothing decorative around it, made Mason look at him for a moment with an expression that was partly respect and partly the particular sadness of watching someone you care about remember who they are. 15 years, Mason said. Yeah. You did good, Caleb. Silver Creek, the garage, Lily. Mason's voice was even, but the weight behind it was enormous. Sarah would have loved this place. Caleb looked at the Chevelle. I know, he said. That's why I can't let it go. The sound of feet on the stairs from the apartment above the garage. Lily coming down right on schedule, 6:32 in the morning, brought both men back to the immediate world. She appeared in the door, hair down, backpack over one shoulder, and stopped when she saw Mason. She looked at him with those quick assessing eyes. You're Mason Reed, she said. Mason looked at her. Something moved through his face, recognition maybe of Sarah in the girl's eyes. I am. You must be Lily. Dad talks about you, she said. Good things, I hope. Neutral things, she said in a tone so precisely like Caleb's that Mason actually smiled. That's about as good as it gets, Mason said. Lily looked at her father. He's here because of Kane. He's here to help, Caleb said. Same thing. She set her backpack down. I'm not going to school today. Yes, you are, Caleb said. Dad, Lily. He said it once, not hard, not loud, but with the particular weight that stopped the argument. I need you somewhere safe today. School is somewhere safe, and I need to know you're there so I can focus on what I need to do. You understand? She stood very still looking at him. If I go to school, she said carefully, and something happens here. Nothing is going to happen here during school hours, Caleb said. When you get out at 3, you go directly to Mrs. Espinosa's place, not here. I'll come get you there. Lily looked at Mason. Will you be here? All day, Mason said. She looked at her father for another long moment. Caleb watched her do the math that 12-year-olds with too much intelligence and too little information were always doing, the incomplete equation, the variables. She couldn't see the answer. That felt wrong even if the logic held. Okay, she finally said. She picked up her backpack. At the door she stopped. Dad, she said, not turning around. Whatever you used to be, it doesn't change who you are now. To me, she paused. I just want you to remember that. Then she was gone. The garage was quiet. Mason looked at Caleb. Hell of a kid, he said. Yeah, Caleb said. His voice was steady. Everything else inside him was not. Let's get to work. By 8:15, they had divided the task. Mason took the south end of the strip. Caleb took the east. He moved quickly, spending no more than 10 minutes in each business, just enough time to say what he needed to say, to plant the idea, to tell people that they were not alone and had never been alone, and that there was a way out if they were willing to trust him for a little while longer. The results were mixed. Ramos at the auto parts store listened and said nothing, and then said he'd think about it, which in Caleb's estimation meant probably yes, given enough time he didn't have. The woman at the nail salon 2 doors down from Espinosa shook her head before he'd finished the first sentence and told him she couldn't talk and asked him to leave, and he left because frightened people cannot be pressed. An older man named Gustafson, who ran a locksmith shop at the north corner, had been paying Kane for 31 months, and who Caleb had barely spoken 2 words to in 11 years of being neighbors, turned out to be the surprise. Gustafson was 67, built like a rail, with the energy of a man who had been waiting for exactly this conversation. I've been documenting for 2 years, Gustafson said. Caleb stared at him. You have? Spreadsheet, Gustafson said. Every payment date amount, who collected it, what they said when they collected it. I've got names, descriptions, partial plate numbers. He looked at Caleb levelly. I was waiting for someone to do something with it. Are you going to do something with it? Yes, Caleb said. Gustafson went to the back of his shop and came back with a thumb drive and a printed copy folded in thirds, which he handed to Caleb. 2 years, he said again. I want that on record. I want someone to know I didn't just sit here and take it. It's on record, Caleb said. I'll make sure of it. He made it back to the garage at 9:52. Mason was already back, sitting on a stool at the workbench, phone to his ear, one finger raised when Caleb came in. Caleb waited. Mason ended the call and looked up. Deborah Wills, he said. She'll take the meeting. Today if we can get there by 1. That's cutting it close, Caleb said. Tell me about Gustafson. Caleb put the thumb drive on this workbench. Mason looked at it. Then he looked at Caleb. 2 years of documentation, Caleb said. Mason picked up the drive, held it for a moment. This changes the math. I know. Combined with Espinosa's records and Daniel's. We've got enough to show a pattern, Caleb said. Maybe enough for a preliminary injunction if Wills moves fast. She'll want to verify, Mason said. She won't just take our word for it. I know, it was just sharing information. But the thing about sharing information in those circles is that people share back. He looked at Caleb carefully. Kane made 3 calls last night after he left your parking lot. One of them was to a man in Phoenix named Gerald Cross. Cross is a fixer, the kind that makes problems go away permanently. He's been used twice before that I know about, once in Tempe and once in Scottsdale, both times when Kane ran into someone who couldn't be bought or scared. The word permanently sat in the air between them. He's not going after businesses anymore, Caleb said. No, Mason said. Tonight isn't about the garage. Tonight is about you specifically. Caleb was quiet for a moment. The clock on the wall read 10:07. Lily, he said. She's at school, Mason said. Cross doesn't work that way. He's a professional. He goes for the principal target. But after tonight, if things don't resolve... They're going to resolve tonight, Caleb said. He said it with the flatness of a man stating a meteorological fact, not a preference, and Mason heard it and nodded. I'll drive, Mason said. They left for the county seat at 11:15. Caleb called ahead to confirm and drove the 50 miles to the county attorney's office, doing the speed limit exactly, which Mason observed with the slight amusement of a man watching an old colleague practice extraordinary self-discipline. Deborah Wills was 44 years old precise, and had the kind of face that had learned to show only what she chose to show. She met them in a conference room rather than her office, which told Caleb she was taking this seriously. But cautiously, the conference room was neutral ground. She looked at the documentation for 11 minutes without speaking. Then she looked up. Gustafson's records are the most complete thing I've seen on a local protection operation in 15 years, she said. It's enough, Mason asked. For a preliminary investigation, yes. For immediate action. She looked at Caleb. Mr. Hunter, I have to ask, why now? If this has been going on for 3 years, why is someone bringing me documentation today? Because today someone is bringing it, Caleb said. She held his gaze. Deputy Briggs is in Kane's pocket. You know that? Yes. Then you know that anything filed locally goes through channels that Kane can influence. I'll need to go above the county level. State attorney's office. That takes time. How much time? Mason said. Days minimum, possibly a week. We don't have a week, Caleb said. We don't have days. Wills looked at him carefully. What do you have? Tonight, he said. She studied him for a moment. Something passed through her expression, a recalibration, a reassessment of what kind of conversation she was actually in. What happens tonight? She said. Victor Kane is going to come to my garage, Caleb said. He's going to come with the intent to end this problem permanently. When he does, I need what happens to have a legal structure around it that makes sure he can't walk away from it. Wills was quiet. I'm not going to break any laws, Caleb said. I'm going to stand in my garage and I'm going to let Victor Kane do what Victor Kane does. I just need someone with the right authority to be on the other side of a phone line when he does it. You want me to listen in, she said. I want you to hear whatever gets said. I want every word that comes out of Victor Kane's mouth tonight to be heard by an officer of the court. Another silence. Wills looked at the documentation in front of her. Then she looked at Mason. Mason, she said. Your friend here is either very smart or very brave, or both. Both, Mason said. Always has been. She made a decision. Caleb could see it happen in her face, a clean, definitive thing. The decision of someone who'd been waiting for a case solid enough to stand on. Give me your number, she said. Tonight at 9 o'clock you call me. Whatever happens after that, I'm a witness. She looked at Caleb directly. But Mr. Hunter, if you do anything tonight that I have to explain to a grand jury, you won't, he said. She held his gaze for another moment. Then she nodded. They were back in Silver Creek by 3:45. Caleb went to Espinosa's place and found Lily sitting at the table in the back room of the dry cleaner, doing homework and eating a tamale that Maria had apparently produced from somewhere. Lily looked up when he came in. She read his face. Tonight, she said. Yeah. She set down her pencil. What do I do? He sat across from her at the table. Maria had quietly disappeared into the front of the shop, the kind of tact that Caleb noted and appreciated. You stay here, he said. With Mrs. Espinosa. You do not come to the garage for any reason. And Mason? Mason will be with me. Lily looked at her homework. A page of algebra half finished. She looked at it for a moment, like she'd forgotten what it was. "Are you scared?" she asked. He thought about lying, discarded it. "No," he said. "And that's the honest truth, which I know sounds wrong, but it isn't. I know what I'm doing tonight, and I know why I'm doing it, and both of those things mean I'm not scared." She looked at him. "What are you doing tonight?" "Finishing it," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her backpack and took out the small wooden box and put it on the table between them. She opened it. The earring, the photograph, the birthday card, all of it exactly as it had been before it fell. She took out the photograph. Sarah Hunter, 29 years old, laughing at something off camera, standing in front of a truck that Caleb recognized as the first vehicle he'd ever worked on in Silver Creek. Her hair was down. She looked like the person she'd been before the illness, fully, completely, radiantly herself. Lily put the photograph between them. "She'd want you to be safe," Lily said. "I know. She'd also want you to finish it." Caleb looked at the photograph of his wife, the laugh lines around her eyes, the way she stood with her weight slightly forward, like she was about to move toward something. "Yeah," he said. "She would." He put the photograph back in the box and closed the latch and handed the box back to Lily. "Stay here," he said. "No matter what you hear." She nodded. He left. The drive back to the garage took 4 minutes. Mason was there when he arrived, and there were 2 other vehicles in the lot trucks he didn't recognize, but Mason met him at the door. "Old contacts," Mason said before Caleb could ask. "I didn't recruit them. They heard the name and they came on their own. They're not here to fight. They're here to witness." Caleb looked at the trucks. 2 men he didn't know standing near them, older, the kind of quiet that came from having been loud in the past. He looked at Mason. "This isn't what I planned," he said. "No," Mason said. "But Kane is bringing a fixer and whatever crew he's assembled, and you standing alone in a garage with a phone line to a county attorney is not a complete plan." He held Caleb's gaze. "They won't throw a punch unless someone throws one first. But they'll be here." Caleb considered it. "Names," he said. "Will and Dutch," Mason said. Dutch was with the Sacramento Chapter 14 years ago. Will ran independent out of Albuquerque. Both retired. Both heard Ghostwriter was having a problem. "I don't want that name used tonight," Caleb said. "Understood." Mason paused. "But Caleb, those men came because of it. That's what I'm telling you. That's what that name means. Not fear, not the old business. It means people show up." Caleb stood with that for a moment. Then he nodded and went inside. He spent the next 2 hours doing what he always did when he was managing things he couldn't fully control. He worked. He moved through the garage methodically, straightening what had been disturbed, organizing the tools, checking the Chevelle over panel by panel. He wasn't fixing anything. He was marking territory the only way he knew how, with the quiet insistence of a man in his own space doing his own work on his own terms. At 7:30 he swept the floor. At 8 o'clock, Mason brought food diner, take-out burgers and coffee, and they ate standing at the workbench, the way men eat when eating is not really the point, but the body needs something. At 8:45, Caleb called Lily. "Still at Espinosa's?" he asked. "Yes." Her voice was steady. She was scared, and she was hiding it the same way he was, or wasn't. "Maria made more food. She's stress cooking." "Eat something." "I did." "I love you," he said. A pause, small. "I love you too, Dad." Another pause. "Dad, whatever happens, I meant what I said this morning." "I know you did," he said. "Okay." Her voice cracked slightly just at the edge of it, and then it was steady again. "Be careful." He ended the call. At 9 o'clock he called Deborah Wills. She answered on the first ring. "I'm here," she said. "Keep the line open," he said, and set the phone on the workbench with the speaker on, and went to stand at the bay door. He could hear everything outside. The desert had gone quiet, the way it got quiet before something. The 2 trucks belonging to Will and Dutch were parked at the edge of the lot. Dark, the men inside them still and patient in the way of men who had waited in darker places than a mechanic's parking lot in Silver Creek, Arizona. Mason stood to Caleb's left, slightly behind him. At 9:22, headlights appeared at the end of the lot. Then more. 4 vehicles total. They came in slow and spread out, and the men who got out of them were not the same crew from the parking lot 2 nights ago. These were different. Fewer, but different. 12 men, and among them hanging near the back with his hands loose at his sides. A man Caleb had never seen before. Trim, watchful, entirely still, who moved with the precise economy of someone for whom this kind of evening was professional rather than personal. Gerald Cross, Victor Kane, came last. He walked to the center of the lot and looked at Caleb standing in the bay door. He looked at Mason. He looked at the 2 trucks at the edge of the lot. Something changed in his face. A flicker. Quick. "Brought company," Victor said. "So did you?" Caleb said. Victor looked him over. "I made some calls last night," he said. "About you. I asked around." He paused. "Ghostwriter." He said the name like he was testing it, like he wasn't sure if it was real or a story. "That's a name from a long time ago," Caleb said. "Hell's Angels," Victor said. "Sergeant at Arms." He looked at Caleb as if remeasuring him from scratch. "You're a long way from that life." "I am," Caleb said. "But here we are." "Here we are," Caleb said. "And I want you to listen to me carefully, Victor, because I'm going to say this once." He kept his voice level, the way he'd always kept it in rooms like this, because level meant controlled, and controlled meant dangerous in a way that loud never was. "I have documentation. 3 years of your operation. Payments, dates, names, amounts. Enough for the state attorney's office to build a case that your lawyer in Phoenix cannot touch. That documentation is already in the hands of an officer of the court." He let that land. "I also have an open phone line right now to an assistant county attorney who is listening to every word being said in this parking lot." Victor stared at him. In the back, Gerald Cross had gone very still. "So here is what happens next," Caleb said. "You get in your vehicles, all of you, and Victor, you turn yourself in, not to Briggs, to the county attorney's office, because the case that's already been started tonight is going to move with or without your cooperation, and your cooperation is the only thing that might matter to a judge when this is over." The parking lot was absolutely silent. Victor Kane stood in the middle of it, and Caleb could see the man doing the math that men like Victor Kane did, calculating angles, exits, outcomes. Calculating whether the fixer in the back was still a viable option. Calculate whether enough force applied tonight could make all of this disappear. And then from the phone on the workbench behind Caleb, clearly and calmly, came the voice of Deborah Wills. "Mr. Kane," she said. "This is Assistant County Attorney Deborah Wills. I want to confirm for the record that I've been listening to this conversation for the past several minutes and that it is being recorded. I also want to advise you that there are 2 state police vehicles that have been repositioned to the Silver Creek area in the past 40 minutes at my request." A pause. "I would strongly encourage you to make a smart decision." In the back of the crowd, Gerald Cross turned and walked to the nearest vehicle, got in, drove away. He didn't say a word to anyone, just left. Clean and fast, the way professionals removed themselves from situations that had changed. The 12 men remaining in the parking lot looked at each other, looked at Victor, looked at the 2 dark trucks at the edge of the lot, looked at Caleb standing in the bay door with Mason beside him. Victor Kane stood alone in the center of it all, and for the first time in however long he'd been doing this, he had nowhere to go that wasn't worse than where he was standing. He looked at Caleb. "You set this up," he said. His voice had changed. The practiced smoothness was gone. This was just a man's voice, plain and stripped. "You came to my garage," Caleb said. "You put your hands on my daughter." Victor was quiet. "You had everything," Caleb said. "The deputy, the lawyer, the crew, and you came after a man who fixes cars for a living and raises his kid alone and doesn't bother anyone." He looked at Victor steadily. "What did you think was going to happen?" Victor didn't answer. From a distance, 2, maybe 3 miles, the sound of a siren. Then another, getting closer. Victor Kane looked at the sky for a moment. Then he looked back at Caleb. "I want a lawyer," he said. "That's the first smart thing you've said." Caleb replied and stepped aside. The night finished the way it had to finish. Not with fire, not with the old violence, not with the settling of things in the language that Ghost Rider had once spoken fluently. It finished with headlights and blue and red strobing in the October dark, and men in official vehicles doing the official work of a system that worked when the right people pushed it hard enough in the right direction. Deputy Briggs, it turned out, was in the third car, not driving it, sitting in the back of it because Deborah Wills had made 2 calls before she made the one to repositioning state police, and the first of those calls had been to internal affairs at the county sheriff's department. Caleb watched from the bay door of his garage as Victor Kane was put into a vehicle with his rights being read to him. He watched until the parking lot was empty. Then he went inside and picked up his phone. Wills was still on the line. "Mr. Hunter," she said. "Yes." "That was either the most controlled thing I've ever witnessed," she said, "or you were very lucky." "Both," he said. A pause. Then something that might have been a small, genuine laugh. "Get some rest," she said. "I'll need a formal statement tomorrow, you and everyone who documented payments." "You'll have it," he said. He ended the call. Mason was standing behind him. Will and Dutch had gotten out of their trucks and were standing at the edge of the lot, not coming closer, not intruding, just present in the particular way of men who'd come to bear witness and had done what they came to do. "It's done," Mason said. "Yeah," Caleb said. But it wasn't done. Not all the way. Because there was still a 12-year-old girl at Maria Espinosa's dry cleaner who had watched her father walk towards something tonight without knowing exactly what it was and who deserved to know. Finally, the whole truth about the man who raised her. That part, the most important part, was still ahead. He called Lily at 9:58. She picked up before the first ring finished, which told him she'd been holding the phone. "It's over," he said. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds. He counted them. "Over like done, or over like tonight?" she asked. "Done," he said. "Kane's in custody. Briggs too." Another silence. Longer this time. He heard her exhale. Not a dramatic thing, not a sob. Just the sound of a 12-year-old girl releasing 3 weeks of held breath in one quiet moment. "Okay," she said. Her voice was steady. "I'm coming home. I'll pick you up." "Dad?" A pause. "Are you okay?" He looked around the garage. The tools hung in their places. The Chevelle sat under the overhead light. The scuff mark on the floor where Lily's knee had hit the concrete was still there. Would probably always be there. Concrete held things that way. "Yeah," he said. "I'm okay." He drove to Espinosa's. Maria met him at the door with the expression of a woman who had been standing in her own kitchen for 3 hours, unable to sit down, and she looked at his face, and whatever she saw there made her close her eyes for a moment and press her hand flat against her sternum, like she was checking that her heart was still in the right place. "Done," she said. "Done," he said. She nodded. Then she turned around and went back into the shop without another word, and he understood that was her way. That some people processed relief, the same way they processed fear privately, with their back turned. Lily was in this back room where he'd left her, except she wasn't sitting anymore. She was standing in the middle of the room with her jacket on and her backpack over one shoulder, like she'd been standing there for a while, ready to go, just waiting for the phone to ring. She looked at him when he came through the door. He opened his arms, and she crossed the room and walked into them, and he held her, the way he'd held her since she was small enough to carry completely without reservation, with the whole weight of everything. He felt compressed into something that had no adequate name in any language he knew. She held on for a long time. Neither of them said anything. When she stepped back, her eyes were dry. His were not quite, and he didn't try to hide it. "Let's go home," he said. They drove back to the garage in silence, and the silence was the good kind. The kind that had room in it, that wasn't compressed by fear or urgency, or the weight of things unsaid. Just a father and his daughter in a truck on a quiet October night driving home. Mason was still there when they arrived. He'd made coffee, real coffee, not the stale stuff from the garage pot. He'd apparently found Caleb's good beans in the apartment above, and he handed Lily a mug of hot chocolate that he'd produced from somewhere, and the three of them sat in the garage with the bay door half open and the desert night coming in cool and flat and clean. Will and Dutch had gone. They'd left without ceremony the way they'd arrived because men who came to bear witness didn't require acknowledgement for doing it. Caleb noted their absence and made a mental note to find a way to say thank you that didn't feel insufficient. Mason left at 11:30. He shook Caleb's hand at the door and held it for a moment and didn't say anything, because Mason Reed had always understood that the things worth saying most were the things that didn't survive being put into words. Caleb walked him to his truck. "You going back to Kingman?" Caleb asked. "In the morning," Mason said. "I booked a room at the motel on 5th, if anything comes up overnight." "Nothing will." "Probably not." Mason looked at him. "Wills is going to move fast. She's got everything she needs, and she's the kind of attorney who doesn't like cases sitting on her desk. Kane is going to be arraigned within 48 hours, and Briggs is already in an internal affairs holding pattern that he's not walking out of." He paused. "It's really done, Caleb." Caleb nodded. "The other businesses," he said. "Espinoza, Daniels, Gustafson. They're going to have to make formal statements." "Wills will handle that," Mason said. "She'll be in touch with all of them. She's not going to hang anyone out to dry." He looked at Caleb levelly. "You did a good thing tonight. You did it the right way. I want you to hear that." "I hear it." "Do you?" Mason studied him. "Because I know what it cost you. I know what you had in front of you in that parking lot and what you chose not to do with it. That's not a small thing, Caleb. That's the whole thing." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "I had a 12-year-old watching," he said. "You've had a 12-year-old watching for 12 years, Mason said. "That's why you are who you are now. Don't sell yourself short." He got in the truck and drove away. Caleb stood in the parking lot for a moment after the taillights disappeared. The sky over Silver Creek was enormous and clear, the way desert skies got after dark, and he stood there looking up at it, the way a man looks at something he needs to put himself in proportion against. 15 years ago, he would have ended tonight differently. Not necessarily with violence. Even Ghost Rider had understood that violence was the least efficient tool in most kits, but with the kind of resolution that left scorch marks. He would have found every angle of leverage available and used it maximally, and walked away with Kane not just arrested, but finished in every sense of the word. Instead, he'd made a phone call. He'd built a paper case out of other people's courage. He'd stood in a parking lot and talked. It felt anticlimactic in a way that he recognized as correct. The right endings often did. He went back inside. Lily had moved from the stool to the old folding chair by the Chevelle, the one that had been there so long it had become part of the garage's furniture, its canvas back faded from blue to something closer to gray. She had the wooden box in her lap, and she was looking at it without opening it. Caleb pulled up the second chair, the one he used when he was teaching her something and needed to be at her level, and sat across from her. She looked up. "Tell me," she said, "not what happened tonight." He could see in her face that she'd already filed that away, already processed it as much as she was going to for now. She meant the other thing. The thing they'd been circling around for weeks, maybe for years, maybe since she was old enough to sense that the father she knew was built on top of a foundation she couldn't see. Caleb put his elbows on his knees and looked at his hands for a moment. The calluses on his palms, the old scar on the left thumb, from a wrench that slipped on a job he'd done at 26 before Silver Creek, before Sarah, before anything recognizable as his current life. "Where do you want me to start?" he said. "The beginning," she said. "Not the beginning of Silver Creek, the real beginning." He looked at her. "Okay," he said. And he told her. He told her about being 22 years old in Bakersfield, California, coming out of a family situation that he described simply as complicated, and which she didn't press him on because she could hear what was underneath the word. He told her about finding his first motorcycle and the specific clarifying feeling it gave him. Not freedom exactly, but purpose direction. The sensation of moving through the world with some agency over where he ended up. He told her about the Hells Angels. He told it plainly, without the mythology, without the romantic overlay that most people brought to the subject. He told her it was a brotherhood that meant something real to him at a time when he didn't have much that meant anything real, and that it also required things from him that he wasn't proud of, and that those two truths existed simultaneously in a way that was hard to explain and important not to simplify. "What kinds of things?" she asked. "Things that I'm not going to describe in detail," he said. "Because some of it you're too young for, and some of it I don't want to put in your head. But the short version is that I was sergeant at arms, which meant I was the person who resolved problems, not through courts or paperwork, through other means." She looked at him steadily. "Did you hurt people?" A pause. "Yes," he said. "Did you kill anyone?" Another pause. Longer. "No," he said. "That's the line I never crossed. And not because I was smart or moral at the time, I was neither particularly. But because there was something in me that understood that was a line you couldn't step back across, and I wasn't ready to be the person on the other side of it." She absorbed that. He watched her do it. Watched her 12-year-old mind with its 12-year-old sense of right and wrong encounter something that didn't fit into clean categories and work with it. "The name," she said. "Ghost Rider." "Yeah. Why Ghost Rider?" He almost smiled. "Because I was quiet," he said. "Because I didn't announce myself. Because by the time people knew I was in a situation, the situation was usually already resolved." He looked at her. It wasn't a compliment originally. It was just an observation that became a name. "Were you proud of it?" He thought about that honestly. "At the time, yes," he said. "Which tells you something about who I was at the time." Lily looked at the wooden box in her lap. She opened it, took out the photograph of Sarah. Looked at it for a moment. "Mom knew," she said. "Everything," he said. "I told her everything before we got serious. She deserved the truth before she decided. And she stayed. She stayed." His voice was even, but the evenness was work. "She said, and this was your mother, so you can imagine how she put it. She said that she didn't love who I used to be, and she wasn't going to pretend she did. But she loved who I was becoming, and she wanted to see where that person ended up." Lily looked at the photograph for a long time. "She was right," Lily said quietly. "About where that person ended up." Caleb said nothing. There wasn't anything to say to that. "So you left," Lily said. "The Angels, just left." "Leaving that kind of organization isn't simple," he said. "There are protocols. There are conversations that have to happen. There are things that have to be settled." He paused. "Mason helped. He'd been looking for a way out himself at the time, and the two of us together made it cleaner, more possible. We vouched for each other in the conversations that mattered." "Were you scared when you left?" "Scared isn't quite the right word," he said. "I was aware of what I was walking away from and what I was walking into. I was 27. Your mother was 25. We came to Silver Creek because it was small enough to start over in and far enough from everything I'd been part of that starting over was actually possible." He looked around the garage. "I had $3,000 and one set of tools. The garage was a vacant lot and an idea." Lily looked up at him. "You built it from nothing." "Yeah. With Mom. With Mom. And then she got sick and I built it with you." She put the photograph back in the box carefully and closed the latch and held the box in both hands for a moment. "Mason called you Ghost Rider tonight," she said. "Those men came because of that name." "They came because they heard that someone I knew was in trouble," Caleb said. "That's what I'd prefer to believe." "Maybe it's both," she said. He looked at her. "Maybe the name is why they heard about it fast enough to show up," she said. "And the other thing is why they actually came." She paused. "Like the name opens the door, but who you are is what fills the room." Caleb stared at his daughter for a moment. "When did you get this smart?" he said. "I had a good teacher," she said. "Two, actually." She looked at the box. "She's in everything you built here. You know that, right? This garage. The way you run it. The way you treat people. It's all her too." He couldn't answer that. Not right away. The garage was quiet around them. The desert outside had gone fully still, that total absence of sound that the desert achieved after midnight, like it was demonstrating a principle. "I need to tell you something else," Caleb said. She looked at him. "What I did tonight building the case, the phone call to Wills, all of it, that's not who I used to be. Ghost Rider didn't do it that way. Ghost Rider would have resolved the situation more directly, more permanently. He held her gaze. The fact that I didn't. The fact that I found another way. That's the thing I want you to understand. Not who I was. Who I chose to be instead. I know, she said. I'm not the same person who wore that name, he said. But I'm also not pretending that person didn't exist. He existed. He did real things with real consequences. And carrying that honestly is part of who I am now. Lily looked at him for a long moment with those eyes. Sarah's eyes dark and clear and impossibly steady for someone her age. Dad, she said, I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be honest. He nodded. Something tightened in his chest and then released the way things release when you've been holding them longer than you realized. I can do that, he said. You already are, she said. You have been. She stood up and she looked for just a moment like the little girl she was only a few years ago, the one who used to fall asleep in the back of the garage while he worked, and who smelled like motor oil and shampoo when he carried her up to bed. I'm going to sleep, she said. You should too. In a little while, he said. She stopped at the door to the stairs, turned back. The hood ornament for the Chevelle comes Thursday, she said. The shipping confirmation came through on my phone. He almost laughed. Okay. I want to put it on together, she said. Yeah, he said. We will. She went upstairs. Caleb sat in the garage alone for a while. I wasn't processing anything in particular. He wasn't arriving at conclusions or making plans. He was just sitting in the space he'd built over 11 years, surrounded by the things that constituted his life. The tools, the cars, the smell of oil and metal, and the particular quality of desert air that came through the half-open bay door and letting the evening finish settling. His phone buzzed at 12:45. A text from Deborah Wills. Short and clean Kane arraigned tomorrow, 9 a.m. Briggs suspended pending investigation. State AG office contacted. This is going to hold. Well done. He set the phone down. He looked at the pegboard where the tools hung in their rows. He looked at the Chevelle. He looked at the stool in the corner where Lily had done 10,000 afternoons of homework while he worked. He looked at the wooden box that Lily had left on the workbench before she went up. He picked it up, opened it, took out the photograph of Sarah. She was laughing at something he could no longer remember. That was the thing about grief that nobody warned you about. Not the sharpness of it, which everyone talked about, but the erosion. The slow disappearance of the specific details. He couldn't remember what she'd been laughing at in this photograph. He could remember her laugh itself with absolute precision. He could hear it exactly whenever he wanted to. But the specific moment that produced it was gone. He looked at her face for a long time. I kept it clean, he said, quietly. To no one. To her. The whole thing, I kept it clean. He put the photograph back, closed the box. He went to the far corner of the garage to the locked storage cabinet that had been locked for 11 years. He found the key on his ring. It had been there so long he'd stopped registering its weight, and he unlocked the cabinet. Inside, behind a shelf of old parts catalogs that had long since been superseded by the internet, inside a case that had not been opened since it was put there, was the jacket. He hadn't looked at it in years. He'd considered throwing it out at several points and had never quite done it, had told himself it was because getting rid of it felt theatrical, performative. But the truth was more honest than that, and he knew it. You didn't throw away the thing that reminded you what you were capable of. You kept it where you could see it and be honest about it. I took it out of the case, held it for a moment. The leather was still good. That kind of leather lasted. It was part of why they wore it. The patches were all still there, exact and correct, the record of a decade of his life that he'd spent the following decade making different choices then. He held it for a long moment. Then he took it to the glass display case in the corner, the one he kept vintage parts in good pieces that he found at estate sales and held on to because they deserved to be kept, and he cleared a shelf and folded the jacket and placed it there. Not on the wall, not displayed like a trophy, just visible, honest. The way the truth about yourself should be, not hidden and not celebrated, but acknowledged. The next morning arrived the way mornings did in Silver Creek fast, with light that went from nothing to everything in about 20 minutes, and heat that followed right behind it. Caleb was up at 6 and had the garage open at 7, same as always, same as 11 years of always, and the first thing he did was make coffee, and the second thing was check the fuel system on the Silverado, whose owner was coming to pick it up at 9, and which was finally actually ready. Lily came down at 6:30. She looked at the display case first thing. She stood in front of it for a long moment, looking at the jacket on its cleared shelf. Caleb watched her from across the garage, socket wrench in hand, waiting. She looked at it for almost a full minute. Then she turned around and came to the Silverado and looked underneath it at her father. 15mm, she said. Already got it, he said. She grabbed her stool and sat down. They worked. At 8:45. Mason knocked on the open bay door before he left for Kingman. He had his bag over one shoulder and his keys in hand, and he looked between Caleb and Lily with an expression that was simply quietly glad. Kane's arraignment is in an hour, he said. I know, Caleb said. You going? No reason to, Caleb said. Wills has everything she needs. Mason nodded. He looked at the display case, at the jacket. He looked at it for a moment with the expression of a man who understood everything about what it meant and where it was and what it was doing there, and then he looked at Caleb. Good call, he said. Yeah. Mason looked at Lily. Take care of this guy, he said. Someone has to, she said, not looking up from her book. Mason's face did something warm. He looked at Caleb one more time, and they shared the look that old friends share when a thing has passed, and both of them know it, and there's nothing adequate to say about it, so you just say it with the look. Call me, Mason said. I will, Caleb said. The truck left. At 9:00, the Silverado's owner arrived, a man named Walt Greer, who came in every 6 months with something new, broken on a truck that was older than several of Caleb's tools, and who always seemed mildly surprised to find that whatever was wrong could be fixed. Walt paid in cash and shook Caleb's hand and drove away satisfied. The day moved the way days moved when they weren't being held in place by crisis, forward steadily, with the ordinary friction and momentum of ordinary things. A woman came in at 10 with a radiator issue. A teenager came in at 11 to ask about an apprenticeship, which Caleb told him to come back about in 6 months when he had his diploma. Pete Daniels stopped by in the early afternoon, not for a repair, just to stop by, which he'd never done in 11 years of being neighbors, and Caleb poured him coffee, and they stood at the workbench and talked about nothing specific for 20 minutes. When Daniels left, he shook Caleb's hand. His grip was tight and said things his voice didn't. The formal statements for wills took most of Wednesday. She sent an investigator, a calm, methodical woman named Torres, no relation to Victor's crew member, who interviewed Caleb and then visited Espinoza and Gustafson and Daniels, and 3 other businesses that had come forward in the 48 hours since Kane's arrest. Because the thing about fear is that it's communal, and when enough of it lifts at once, people remember they were never alone. Caleb gave his statement in the back office of the garage, sitting at the same small table where he'd sat with Lily the night of Kane's arrest. He told the investigator everything clearly and in sequence, and she wrote it down and asked precise follow-up questions, and he answered those too. When she was leaving, she stopped at the door. Mr. Hunter, she said, I've been doing this work for 16 years. I've seen a lot of cases like this. She looked at him steadily. Most of them the businesses paid until the operation either moved on or someone eventually got hurt badly enough that they couldn't ignore it. In 16 years, I've never seen one resolve the way this one was resolved. She paused. What you did building the case, getting wills on the line, the whole thing, that was remarkable. A lot of people helped, he said. Yes, she said. But someone had to not fold first. She left. Caleb sat at the table for a moment after she was gone. Then Lily knocked on the open door. The UPS guy just came, she said. He looked at her. She was holding a small flat box with a shipping label, and she was trying to keep her expression neutral and not quite managing it. Hood ornament, he said. Hood ornament, she said. He stood up. They went to the Chevelle together, and Lily opened the box with the careful hands she used for things she cared about. And inside was the part clean and correct, a small chrome emblem exactly as it should be. She held it up, looked at it, then looked at the car. "I'll get the adhesive," Caleb said. They spent 40 minutes on it, longer than the job required, because they weren't in a hurry, and because the job wasn't really the point. When it was done, the Chevelle's hood looked exactly as it should look, exactly as it had looked before the men came and tried to take pieces of their life apart. Lily stepped back and looked at the car. "Better," she said. "Yeah," he said. She looked at him. "We're going to finish it. We're going to finish it," he said. She looked at the car for another moment. Then she went and sat on her stool and opened her homework, and Caleb went back to the engine bay, and they resumed the long, patient project of putting something broken back together into something whole. Outside Silver Creek was going about its afternoon. Espinosa's dry cleaner had the closed sign down, the closed sign that had gone up 2 days before Kane's arrest, and which had come down the morning after, as if Maria had been waiting for a specific thing to happen before she was willing to open the door again. Pete's hardware store had a hand-lettered sign in the window that said, "Sale this weekend in paint," that looked like it had been applied this morning with an excess of enthusiasm. The world was not fixed. There were still statements to be filed, and an arraignment that had gone the right way, and a trial that was still coming, and Briggs was suspended, but not yet processed, and the county attorney's office had work ahead of them that would take months. The world was not fixed. But Silver Creek was breathing differently than it had been 2 weeks ago, and Caleb could feel it, that particular shift in the atmosphere of a community, when a fear that everyone has been carrying quietly is suddenly no longer the private, unspoken weight it was. The coffee at the diner that morning had tasted like a place that was starting to remember it belonged to the people in it. At 5 o'clock, when Caleb turned off the main light in the garage and left the work light over the Chevelle, he stood for a moment in the doorway and looked at the space. The jacket in the display case caught the light. Just the edge of it. Just the dark leather. The oldest patches, the evidence of a decade. He hadn't erased because you didn't get to erase your decades. You only got to choose what you did with the ones that followed. He'd chosen this. The garage. The town. Lily's homework on the stool in the corner. Coffee at 7. Closing time at 5. He'd chosen it against some very strong pull in the opposite direction, and he'd kept choosing it every day for 15 years. And tonight, he felt that choice. The way you only feel your best choices. Not triumphantly, not loudly, but with the deep, quiet satisfaction of something that has proven to be exactly what you thought it was when you made it. He turned off the work light. He locked the garage. He went upstairs and made dinner and called Lily down from where she was doing the rest of her homework, and they ate together at the kitchen table, the way they always ate, talking about the things that constituted a life, rather than the things that threatened it. The Chevelle would be done by spring. He was already sure of it. The trial date was set for March. Deborah Wills called Caleb on a Thursday morning in late October to give him the news, and her voice carried the particular quality of a professional who had done everything right and knew it, and was allowing herself exactly one moment of satisfaction before moving on to the next thing. "Kane's attorney filed for continuance," she said. "We opposed. The judge denied the continuance. March 14th. "How solid is the case?" Caleb asked. "As solid as I've seen at this level," she said. "Gustafson's documentation alone would have been enough for a conviction. What we have on top of that is it's comprehensive. Kane's attorney knows it. He's already started conversations about a plea arrangement." "Will you take it?" A pause. "Depends on what he offers. If he gives us Briggs fully, every transaction, every conversation, the entire arrangement, then yes. Because Briggs as a corrupt law enforcement officer is actually the more important case for the county long-term. Kane is a criminal. Briggs was supposed to be the wall between Kane and the community he was harming." Her voice went flat in the way that revealed genuine feeling underneath. "That's the one I want on the record." Caleb stood at the workbench with the phone to his ear. Through the open bay door he could hear the sound of Silver Creek going about its morning, a truck on old Route 9, the distant bell above the diner door. Ordinary sounds that had the quality now of something appreciated rather than just registered. "What do you need from me between now and March?" he said. "Nothing new. Your statement is complete and strong. I'll need you available for testimony if it goes to trial, but if the plea happens, we won't need that." She paused. "Mr. Hunter, I want to say something that isn't strictly professional." "Okay. What you built the case, the documentation, the network of people who were willing to come forward, that's not what I typically encounter. Most situations like this, we get the evidence after something bad has already happened. After a fire or a beating or worse. You got it before." A pause. "That matters. That's people who didn't get hurt because you did it right." He didn't say anything for a moment. "Thank you," he said. "March 14th, she said, and ended the call. He set the phone down on the workbench and stood there for a moment, with his hands braced on the edge of it, looking at nothing in particular. Then he picked up the socket wrench and went back to the engine he was working on, because that was what you did. You got the information, you processed it, you went back to work. Lily came in at 3:20, backpack over one shoulder. Ponytail half down, exactly as she always came in. And she looked at his face, the way she always looked at his face when she came through the door. A quick read, fast and comprehensive. The kind of look that had developed over years of being a child who paid attention. "Good news," she said. "Trial's in March," he said. "Kane's probably going to take a plea." She put her backpack on the stool. "What does that mean?" "It means he admits to what he did officially and accepts a sentence rather than risking a jury trial." He came out from under the hood and wiped his hands. "It also means Briggs goes down fully, which is the part that matters for the town." She thought about that. "So it's really over." "The legal part is just starting," he said. "But the part where anyone in Silver Creek is scared to open their shop in the morning, yeah, that part's over." She nodded slowly. She looked at the display case where the jacket sat, the way she'd been looking at it since he'd put it there. Not constantly, not obviously, but the glance that went there occasionally, the way your eyes go to something that is still being understood. "How do you feel?" she asked. He considered the question the way he considered all of her direct questions seriously, because she asked them seriously, and she deserved the same in return. "Like I did the right thing," he said. "And like the right thing was harder than the wrong thing would have been, and that's probably how you know it was right." She looked at him with those eyes. "Mom used to say something like that, she said. "I know," he said. "I learned it from her." November came in behind October. The way seasons moved in the desert. Not gradually, but in a sudden recalibration of temperature and light. The mornings got cold fast, and the afternoons took longer to warm up, and the garage took on a different quality in the mornings. The kind of quality that required the space heater in the corner and 2 cups of coffee instead of 1. The town changed in ways that were small and specific, and that Caleb noticed because he'd been paying attention to this town for 11 years and knew what its normal looked like. Maria Espinoza removed the second lock she'd installed on her back door 18 months ago. She mentioned this to Caleb in passing one morning when she brought him a container of her mother's tamales, the good ones with the green chili, which she did now approximately once every 2 weeks, in a gesture that was not payment for anything, and which he accepted as exactly that. Pete Daniels hired a part-time employee for the first time in 3 years. He'd let the previous one go to cut costs right around the time Kane's payments had started making his margins impossible. He mentioned the hire to Caleb with a look on his face, like a man who had gotten something back that he'd stopped believing he would. Gustafson the locksmith put a new sign in his window. Clean professional, the kind of sign you invested in when you were planning to be somewhere for a long time. These were not dramatic things. They were the kinds of changes that didn't make news, that didn't look like anything from a distance. But Caleb had spent 11 years learning that a town's health was in its small decisions, in whether people invested or held back, in whether they looked their neighbors in the eye or kept moving in, whether the sum of 1,000 daily choices added up to a community, or just a collection of people living near each other. Silver Creek was choosing to be a community again. He worked through November, with the particular satisfaction of a man whose external circumstances have resolved sufficiently to allow him to be fully present in his actual work. The garage was busy. Word had gotten around that Hunter Auto Repair was worth knowing about in the specific word-of-mouth way that small business reputations spread in small towns, and he was turning down jobs he didn't have time for, which was a problem he was happy to have. He and Lily worked on the Chevelle every Saturday morning. 3 hours minimum after breakfast and before anything else. This was the rule they'd established without discussing it, the way the best rules between people who know each other well get established. They talked while they worked, and they worked when they weren't talking, and both activities informed the other. In early December, on a Saturday morning, with the space heater running and snow threatening on the weather app, though it never actually materialized, Lily handed him a part without being asked and said without looking up from what she was doing, "I looked up the Hells Angels." Caleb was quiet for a moment. He took the part. "What did you find?" he said. "A lot of stuff," she said. "Some of it I'm pretty sure is exaggerated. Some of it I'm pretty sure isn't." She kept working. "I looked up the sergeant-at-arms role specifically." "Yeah." "It said they're responsible for maintaining order and discipline within the chapter, and externally when necessary." She paused. "It made it sound more organized than I expected." "It's a serious organization," he said. "Whatever else you want to say about it." "I'm not saying anything else about it," she said. "I'm just trying to understand what it actually was, not the movie version." He looked at her over the hood of the Chevelle. "What do you want to know?" he said. She looked up. "Did you believe in it at the time?" He thought about that. "I believed in the people," he said. "At the time the chapter I was in there were men in it who were more dependable than anyone I'd ever met. Men who showed up. Men who kept their word." He paused. "The organization itself. The wider thing, I had complicated feelings about that even then. But the specific people, the specific brotherhood, yeah, I believed in that." "And you still do about those people." "Some of them," he said. "Mason, a couple of others." He looked at the engine. "Some of them I've left behind in every sense of the word and don't miss." She nodded, went back to work. "One more question," she said. "Go ahead." "Do you think you would have turned out okay without it if you'd never joined?" He set down the wrench and thought about the question the way it deserved to be thought about, fully honestly, without the comfortable answer. "I don't know," he said. "I was not on a good path at 22. The discipline of it, the accountability to a group that did something real for me at a time when I needed something real." He looked at her. "But I also think there were ways I could have found that which didn't require the other parts. I just didn't know how to find them at 22. She considered that. "Okay," she said. "That's honest." "Trying to be," he said. "You always are," she said. "That's the thing I want you to know. Whatever you think you're hiding from me about your past, the fact that you're always honest about the stuff that's in front of us, that's the part that matters." He looked at his daughter. "You're 12, he said. 12 and a half, she said, and went back to work. The first twist, nobody expected, came on a Wednesday in the second week of December, and it came not from Victor Kane's attorney, or from Deborah Wills, or from any part of the legal machinery that had been grinding forward at its careful, methodical pace. It came from Torres. Eddie Torres called the garage on a Wednesday morning at 8:45. Caleb didn't recognize the number, but he answered because he answered numbers he didn't recognize on principle, having learned long ago that the calls you weren't expecting were often the ones that mattered. "This is Torres," the voice said. Caleb was quiet for a moment. "From Kane's crew," Torres added, which was unnecessary. "I know who you are," Caleb said. "I figured." A pause. "I want you to know I talked to the county investigator 2 days ago, voluntarily. I gave them everything I had on Kane's operation, the full internal structure, who was on payroll, the arrangement with Briggs, the financial flow." Another pause. "I'm not asking for anything. I just thought you should know." Caleb leaned against the workbench. "Why did you do it?" "Because I've been in Kane's crew for 8 months, and in that time I've watched him shake down 31 businesses, run by people who were just trying to make a living." Torres's voice was flat and specific. "I've done things in my life I'm not proud of. Most of them I can live with because they were between adults who understood the game they were in. This was different." "Mrs. Espinoza," Caleb said. "Among others," Torres said. "Yeah." A silence. "When I saw you in that parking lot," Torres said, And I said that name, I said it because I needed Kane to understand what he'd walked into. I thought it might stop him. His voice went slightly dry. It didn't, as you probably noticed. He's not good at stopping, Caleb said. No. A pause. You handled it right. What you did, the evidence, the attorney on the line, that was smart. Smarter than what I expected. What did you expect? A short silence. The old way, Torres said. Which would have worked, but would have cost you more than you wanted to pay. Yeah, Caleb said. For what it's worth. Torres said, the name still means something. To people who know what it meant. Not as a threat anymore. Just as a reputation. For a certain kind of integrity, if that's not too strange a word. Caleb was quiet for a moment. It's not too strange, he said. Torres said goodbye and ended the call. Caleb stood at the workbench and looked at the phone in his hand for a moment. Then he set it down and went back to work because that was the only appropriate response to a phone call like that. But something had shifted slightly in how he held the name that had followed him here from another life. Not Ghost Rider the Enforcer, not Ghost Rider, the instrument of resolution by other means. Just a name that apparently meant to people who'd encountered it over 15 years that when Caleb Hunter gave his word, he kept it. When he said a thing was going to be handled, it got handled. When he decided to protect something, it stayed protected. He could live with that. He could more than live with it. The plea agreement was entered on a Tuesday in February, 6 weeks before the scheduled trial date. Kane pled guilty to 37 counts of extortion and 2 counts of conspiracy. Briggs pled separately to corruption charges that Wills had assembled into a case that she described to Caleb over the phone, in a voice that was professionally composed and privately thrilled. Kane received 12 years. Briggs received 8+ permanent decertification, which meant he would never work in law enforcement again in any capacity. The attorney in Phoenix, who it turned out had known the full scope of Kane's operation and had been providing legal cover for it for 3 years, received a separate indictment that was still working its way through the system. Wills called Caleb after each development. Not because she was required to, because she'd decided he deserved to know. When the Briggs sentence came down, she called and said simply, 8 years and done. And Caleb said, thank you, Deborah. And she said, thank you. And they both understood what each of them meant. Mason called that same night. Done, Caleb said before Mason could say anything. Done, Mason repeated. A pause with warmth in it. How do you feel? Like I want to finish the Chevelle, Caleb said. Mason laughed. A real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere central. That's the right answer, he said. That's exactly the right answer. Spring arrived on a Saturday morning with the particular decisiveness that spring had in the desert. Not tentative, not gradual, just suddenly present. The air changed overnight from winter cold to something that promised heat without yet delivering it. The kind of morning that made you want to open every door and let it in. Caleb opened the garage at 6:30. Not because he had a job waiting, because it was spring and the Chevelle was almost done, and Saturday mornings in the garage were the best hours of his week. Lily came down at 7, an hour earlier than usual, which told him she'd known this morning was different without being told. She looked at the Chevelle. She looked at him. She put her hair up the way she put it up when she was getting ready to work and said, Today. Today, he said. She went to the workbench and pulled on her gloves, and they started at 7:15 on a Saturday in March, 2 weeks after Kane's sentencing on the last phase of a 1969 Chevelle SS that had been in pieces for 4 years, and that had constituted across those 4 years the ongoing project of 2 people learning to be a family after the loss of the person who had held the center of that family. They worked through the morning without hurrying. There was a particular quality to work that is going toward its completion, a different rhythm than the work of the middle, which is sustainable and steady. The final work has something else in it, a kind of clarity. At 11:40. Lily stood back from the driver's side and looked at the car. Then she walked around it slowly. All the way around, looking at every panel, every piece of trim, the hood emblem that had been replaced and sat now exactly as it should. Sit the chrome that she'd spent 3 Saturdays polishing to a clarity that reflected the garage ceiling back at itself. She stopped at the front and just looked at it. Caleb watched her. "It's done," she said. Her voice was very even. "Yeah," he said. She put her hands on the hood flat gentle, the way you touch something you've worked hard on and are saying something to. Then she stepped back. "Are we going to drive it?" she said. "That was the plan," he said. She looked at him. "When? Soon as I can get it registered and insured," he said. "Week, maybe 2. She nodded. She was working very hard to keep her face composed, and the effort of it was visible, and he loved her for it, and also found it unnecessary. "Lily," he said. She looked at him. "It's okay," he said. "You can just feel it." Her composure held for exactly 2 more seconds. Then she closed the distance between them and put her arms around him and pressed her face against his shoulder, and he put his arms around her, and they stood in the garage with the finished Chevelle in front of them, and Sarah's absence filling the room, the way her absence always filled every room he stood in, not as emptiness, but as a kind of presence, the shaped space that a person leaves. He let Lily cry for as long as she needed to. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that was better than silence. When she stepped back, she wiped her face with the sleeve of her work shirt. His old work shirt, she'd claimed it 2 years ago, and he'd let her. And she looked at the Chevelle and said, she would have loved this car. "She did love this car," Caleb said. "She picked the color. The one we're going with, that shade of blue, she picked it from a sample card 4 years ago and said that's the one, and then she got sick and we never got to it, but I kept the card." Lily stared at him. "You never told me that," she said. "No," he said. "That's her color on the car." "It's her car," he said simply. "It always was." Lily turned and looked at the Chevelle again, and now she was seeing something different than she'd been seeing all morning, and Caleb could see the realization of it move through her face. The understanding that the project had always been exactly what it was, that the 4 years of Saturday mornings had been, among other things, a way of keeping a conversation going with someone who wasn't there to have it. "Okay," Lily said finally, very quietly. "Okay." They stood with the car for a while. Then Lily said, "I want to learn how to drive it." "You're 12, he said. "I'll be 13 in August," she said. "Legal driving age in Arizona is 16. "I didn't say I wanted to drive it on a road," she said, with the specific patience of a person explaining something to someone who is being deliberately obtuse. "I said I want to learn, in a parking lot, with you." He looked at her. "We'll see," he said. "That means yes," she said. "It means we'll see," he said. She went back to the workbench and picked up a cloth and started going over the chrome one more time. Unnecessary, but satisfying the way you return to a thing when the thing is done and you need a few more moments with it. The Tuesday after the Chevelle was finished, Caleb got a visit he wasn't expecting. I was under the hood of a pickup that had come in with a starter problem when he heard boots on the concrete. Familiar weight, familiar cadence. He straightened up and turned around. Mason Reed was standing in the middle of the garage. He hadn't called ahead. He hadn't texted. He was just there the way Mason had always operated, appearing when appearing was the right move, with the confidence of a man who understood his welcome. "You didn't call," Caleb said. "Drove down on a whim," Mason said. He looked at the Chevelle sitting in the far bay, finished and blue and complete. He looked at it for a long time. "That's her car," he said. Not a question. "Yeah," Caleb said. Mason walked over to it slowly. He stood next to it and put his hand on the roof, just rested it there, and was quiet for a moment. "Sarah would have driven this thing too fast," he said. "Every chance she got," Caleb said. Mason took his hand off the roof. He turned and looked at Caleb with an expression that was too layered to name simply grief and appreciation, and something that was the specific feeling of watching someone you care about have survived in the fullest sense of the word. "You did good, Caleb," he said. "I mean all of it, the whole 11 years. What you built here." He looked around the garage. "What you built up there." He meant the apartment, the life, Lily. Caleb said, "I had help. You had Sarah," Mason said. "And you had Lily. And you did the work." A pause. "I want you to understand something. The reason I came down here on a whim on a Tuesday driving 3 hours, it wasn't to see the car. It was because there are things you don't say when you're in the middle of them, and now we're past the middle, and I wanted to say it to your face. Caleb waited. I was worried about you, Mason said. For a lot of those 15 years, I was worried about who you were going to be on the other side of all of it. Whether the quiet was peace or whether it was suppression. Whether Silver Creek was a choice or a hiding place. He looked at Caleb steadily. I know now. It was a choice. Every day of it. And the man you chose to be, I'm proud to know him. Caleb stood with that. Didn't deflect it. Didn't minimize it. Let it land the way it was intended. Thank you, he said. For coming. For the car reveal and the speech, Mason said, and the dryness in his voice was the kind that was full of warmth underneath. For all of it, Caleb said. 15 years of it. Mason shook his hand, held it, let it go. He stayed for lunch. Lily came home from school and found Mason at the kitchen table eating a sandwich and immediately sat down across from him and started asking him questions about Caleb that Caleb would have preferred she didn't ask, and Mason answered them with the cheerful specificity of someone who had been waiting for exactly this conversation. Did he always fix things? Lily asked. He always fixed things, Mason said. In one way or another. The form it took changed. The basic impulse didn't. Lily looked at her father. That tracks, she said. You're ganging up on me, Caleb said. We're appreciating you, Mason said. There's a difference. Mason left at 3. He shook Caleb's hand again at the truck, and then in a gesture that was unusual for him, put his hand briefly on Caleb's shoulder. Call me when you take the Chevelle out, he said. I want to hear about it. You could come down, Caleb said. Maybe I will, Mason said. He drove away. The Chevelle was registered on the last Friday in March. Caleb picked up the plates at the DMV in the county seat and drove back to Silver Creek with the windows down, because the desert in late March at 65 miles an hour felt like the specific promise of a season that was coming in exactly on time. He put the plates on the Chevelle that evening. He stood back and looked at it. Finished. Blue. Complete. Sarah's color on every panel. He took a photograph. He wasn't a person who took many photographs, but he took this one standing in the garage doorway. The Chevelle lit by the overhead and the last of the evening light through the bay door. He sent it to Mason. Mason texted back 4 minutes later. Perfect. And then, after a pause, she'd say the same. Caleb set the phone down. I went upstairs and knocked on Lily's door. Yeah, she said. He opened the door. She was at her desk, doing homework pencil in hand, the focused posture she had when she was working on something she actually found interesting. Tomorrow morning, he said. Early, before anyone's on the road. She looked at him. Parking lot out at the old fairgrounds, he said. Big flat, nobody out there on Saturday before 8. Her pencil was already down. I'll set an alarm, she said. 6:30, he said. Set, she said. He closed the door. He went back downstairs and made coffee he didn't need and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the desert going dark outside. The way he'd stood at this window on 10,000 evenings over 11 years, watching the specific shade of blue that the desert sky went at the last moment of light. A blue that was its own color, and nobody had named it adequately. Sarah's blue. He'd called it once years ago, and she'd laughed and said that was the most ridiculous thing she'd ever heard. And then she'd looked out the window and said, well, maybe. He stood there for a while. In the garage below him the Chevelle sat finished and full of everything that had gone into building it, the 4 years and the Saturday mornings and the fights against forgetting and the slow specific work of learning to carry loss rather than be buried by it. At 6:20 the next morning, Lily was already downstairs when he got there. Jacket on, hair up, sitting on the stool with her hands in her lap, with the focused, barely contained energy of someone who has been awake since 5:30 and has been extremely patient about it. He handed her the keys. She looked at them in her hand. Then she looked at him. For real, she said. For real, he said. But I'm in the passenger seat, and we don't go over 15. 20, she said. 15, he said. 1750, she said. You're negotiating for a car you can't legally drive. I'm negotiating with a man who taught me that everything is a conversation, she said. He opened the garage door. They drove to the old fairgrounds in the pickup, and they parked, and Lily got behind the wheel of the Chevelle for the first time, and the look on her face when the engine turned over, the look that moved through her in one long unguarded moment before she composed herself, was the look of someone receiving something they hadn't let themselves fully expect. She drove 17.5 miles an hour around the empty parking lot of the old Silver Creek Fairgrounds on a Saturday morning in late March, while her father sat in the passenger seat and said almost nothing because there was nothing adequate to say. She drove with both hands on the wheel and her back straight and her eyes forward, and she was 12 years old, and she was Sarah's daughter, and she was his daughter, and she was already unmistakably herself. When they got back to the garage, she turned off the engine, and they sat in the quiet for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" he said. She thought about it. "For all of it," she said. "The garage, the car, the honest answers." A pause. "For not being the person you used to be, while still being the person you were." He looked at her. "That's a complicated thing to say," he said. "I had a complicated role model," she said. He almost laughed. Almost. He got out of the car and walked around to the driver's side and opened her door, and she got out, and they stood together in the morning. This father and his daughter, beside the car that had taken 4 years to finish, and that belonged in every sense that mattered to the woman who had chosen them both and made them a family, and left too soon, and left everything. "She's proud of you," Lily said. "Of us," he said. Lily looked at the car one more time. Then she looked at the garage, the open bay door, the morning coming in, clean and cold, and full of the particular promise that spring mornings had in the desert. "You going to open up?" she said. 7 o'clock, he said. "Same as always." She nodded. She went inside. He stood in the parking lot alone for just a moment. He looked up at the sky, the desert sky going from gray to gold to blue, in the way it went every morning, the irreversible and reliable way that some things happened, whether you were watching or not. He thought about the man who'd walked into this parking lot with $39 and a box of tools and a decision to be different. He thought about what it had taken to stay different across all the years and all the moments that tested it, and what it still took every morning when you made the same choice again. He thought about Victor Kane standing in this lot with 13 men behind him, and he thought about 3 words spoken quietly in a parking lot that had dismantled more of Kane's confidence than any threat could have, because power and the fear of power were 2 entirely different things, and knowing the difference was the whole education. He thought about Mason, about Torres's phone call, about Deborah Wills's voice on an open line saying his name into the October dark. He thought about Sarah picking a shade of blue from a sample card 4 years ago and saying that's the one with the absolute certainty she'd brought to everything. He went inside. He made coffee. He opened the garage at 7 o'clock, same as always, because that was who he was, not who he had been, not the name that other men had given him in another life, for a capacity that he had spent 15 years making sure was never the first thing he reached for. How was a mechanic in a small town in Arizona? He was a father. He was the man who showed up on time, who kept his word, who fixed what was broken with patient hands and sent people away with something that worked. He was the man who had stood in a parking lot and refused to let fear be the language of his life or the lives of the people around him. He was the man Lily Hunter saw when she looked at her father. That was enough. That had always been enough. That would always be exactly enough.